So I'm going to follow up on a few things from my past two videos. One thing is that I realized that this is probably like the best argument for God ever since Nick Bostrom's simulation argument. So the simulation argument says that you have like at least a 30% chance that you're going to be in a simulation, because if we just assume that technology continues to progress and we assume that consciousness is a physical process, then eventually civilizations are going to run these simulations which contain conscious beings. And assuming that this happens, if there are no great filters around in our future that prevent all civilizations from doing this, then taking all that into account, that there may be great filters, taking into account that some of them might have reasons for not doing this, including moral reasons or practical reasons, then there might be at least just a 30% chance that the simulation argument is valid. In which case, you can make this argument from within any universe, and therefore you would get this recursive process of being in a simulation, in a simulation, in a simulation, because they would rapidly outnumber real universes. So that would give you a kind of theology, a kind of theology that could only arise in this modern technological era. But it still doesn't solve the ultimate issue of base reality. Base reality still had to somehow be simple, it still somehow had to be dumb, and from that arose this complex process through some method of natural selection. Complexity had to be bootstrapped by a dumb process that was simple. And so that it's not entirely capturing a lot of the things that theology would have captured. But this right here kind of actually turns out to capture more of it, and it's not attempting to, I just noticed that it does. So, for instance, this implies that the most intelligent mind configurations are those that are going to be able to dump more experiential mass into the states that they want to achieve. So therefore, you should expect to find yourself in experiences which are the dreams and aspirations of those causal chains initiated by intelligent processes, as opposed to not. Simply by the mere fact that these are more effective at actually creating states of reality than dumber processes. So processes that are not highly intelligent are highly unlikely. They're going to fail to achieve their goals, and so therefore very few future mind configurations are going to have anything to do with what they wanted to achieve. If they were some dumber process here, and you had a smarter process here that actually attained that goal that it wanted with more frequency, since we are all the sum being, you're going to find yourself more in these pockets of existence than in these other ones. And what's more, you don't actually have to worry about time in the usual sense of like time in Newtonian mechanics, where people used to think you had a first mover. God had to be located here because he had to be the prime mover, and then everything has to happen from the will of God, at time 0, and then it's time 1, time 2, time 3. We know that relativity destroys this picture, and we exist in an eternal block. So there is no time which is just ticking. You actually exist in something which is eternal, and there is no actual now, which makes sense. So it doesn't actually matter if God is here or God is here, God is here, God is space-like or time-like separated from you in relativity, because ultimately what matters is what has the most causality fluid at its disposal? What is actually causing more stuff to happen, no matter where it is in the eternal block? And for those people that don't understand why there is no now, they're like, how could you say that there is no now? Obviously, I'm in the same room as this other person. We're in the same now. What do you mean? Actually, no, you're not in the same now as even a person in the same room. You're not in the same hypersurface of the present. Not even two neurons in your brain are in the same hypersurface of the present. So time really is an emergent property of self-modeling human brains that have a parietal cortex. And so you end up with an algorithm, a computation that is spread out in space-time in different locations, and that in itself feels that a present exists. It creates a sensation of present. But a person that you see across the room is not in the same present as you. You know, even a person that's like right here, that you feel right here, touching you, all upon you, they're not actually in the same present. Strictly speaking, they are not in the same present. Their experiences, whatever those are, at any slice of experience that you want to draw, has its own intrinsic existence, and certainly not the same hypersurface of the present. That would just violate relativity. And like I said in all my other videos, relativity is not up for debate. It's not like some just theoretical construct. It has made predictions which have been validated by experiment for a very, very long time. So there's just no getting around that. Like, relativity implies that we exist in an eternal object in which there is no single now. There are just reference frames that exist with their presence being defined relative to another reference frame. So this also undercuts a lot of the sort of anti-natalist objection to having kids. It doesn't undercut it in the sort of sense of virtue. I mean, in the same way that it might be virtuous to not, stab someone randomly. It's virtuous, but does it really make a difference at the ultimate level? Not really. I mean, you're making epsilon difference in the multiverse. The multiverse has at least 3 levels. You've got an infinite amount of mind configurations. You've got the first level, which is just the universe doesn't end at a Hubble volume. So no cosmologist thinks that, from the center at which you're located, and then you go out to however far light is going to reach in 3 dimensions, that's where the universe ends. No one thinks that. So you've got another Hubble volume and another Hubble volume, and it's infinite. And this is implied by the fact that the universe seems to be flat, and flat not in 2 dimension, not in the sense that it's 2-dimensional, but in the sense that its topology is flat, and matter is evenly distributed across the entire thing. So you exist in this thing which is infinite in extent, probably. It certainly doesn't end at a Hubble volume. It's very big, and therefore contains so many mind configurations and copies and near copies of everything that you see around you. That's just a level 1 multiverse. The level 2 multiverse has to do with chaotic inflation, also known as eternal inflation, which just postulates that there are universes with different physical constants that are bubbling constantly, being formed, and that's just an implication of the Big Bang Theory. Like, in order to have the Big Bang Theory be consistent, you need inflation, and that was proposed by Alan Guth way back in the 1990s, and most cosmologists who study this pretty much are still on board with eternal inflation and therefore the Big Bang. So you're going to have a multiverse on 2 levels already. That's level 1, that's level 2. On the level 3, it's just saying that the wave function doesn't collapse. So you have the Schrödinger equation, and it's just describing reality. You don't have to postulate that solipsism so that consciousness collapses the wave function. You don't say that. You just say the Schrödinger equation describes something which is just real. And so observers are going to find themselves where they find themselves. It's not a matter of one single reality existing as opposed to all the other ones, where you find up quark as opposed to down quark. You find both of them, one observer for each. And from each location, the observer can't tell that he's in the other location also. So that's 3 levels to the multiverse right there. You're going to have an infinite amount of mind configurations, and you're going to have an infinite amount of experiences. So if you have like lust for qualia, lust for a variety of experiences, rest assured you're going to have all experiences that you can have. So it doesn't really make a difference if you add another variety of experience, like having some child, because, the father is the son. In the same way that, if you perform some action, and for example, you enlist in the military, and then 5 years down the line, there's an experience here that's in Japan, that is in no way you. That is just its own experience. It is not this experience by its physical configuration. In that same way, having some child, that's just another physical configuration. It's not you. Unless you're assuming that souls actually exist, that by having been in a womb, this has gained a different soul. And so that's Christian or Islamic metaphysics. That's just not physical. So a physical view is that these are all not you, or they are all you, whatever you want to say, but you're certainly not creating brand new souls that wouldn't have existed otherwise. So on an ultimate level, you have no argument. You're not making a difference. On a present, just virtue level discussion, is it virtuous to abstain from creating minds that are going to experience things that you would rather not experience? That's a moral decision that you can make, and that certainly sounds convincing and virtuous to me, and I would certainly not have kids for those reasons. I would much rather have highly, properly engineered experiences that have high levels of positive valence constantly. And that's just my preference from this location. But does it really make a difference at the multiverse level? It seems like it doesn't. It doesn't make a difference anything that you do, because ultimately you're the same experiencer. What makes the most difference is whatever is caused from those highly intelligent locations, because they are going to have the most, they're going to dump the most experiential mass into those dreams and desires that they wanted to funnel configurations into. So we should be worried about what is it which has the most influence, what is it that has the most intelligence, what is that doing? And because it might not be something that you agree with from your location at present. So that's kind of just the entire friendly AI problem. And it does seem pretty futile, because we don't seem very smart. And once you actually have something which is very smart, that's already in charge anyway at the ultimate level. And so the other thing that I want to clear up from one of my last videos is I said that once you degrade your computational specificity, so remember, you have high computational specificity over here, and then you have low computational specificity over here, and so therefore these are more common, not including whatever effects intelligence might have. And intelligence would be this highly specific stuff, because it requires so many complex algorithms and so much specific information in order to be intelligent. Regardless of whatever this is causing and dumping experiential mass into, this is just going to be common by default, those simple states, because dying organisms and organisms being born and organisms which are just very simple and having very simple experiences are going to be here. And so we can assume that these are more common than like the experience that I'm having, the experience that you're having, which has a lot of highly specific contents and processes. So the thing that I said was, we're not sure if this is painful or blissful. And that was kind of a simplified way of what I actually meant. Because obviously, something which is the most simple self-aware process isn't going to have pain or suffering or pleasure or anything like this, which requires other complex self-modeling algorithms on top of subconscious, little events. So you have subconscious thing of pain or subconscious thing of pleasure, and then this has to bind to something in its future light cone, some complex self-modeling stuff, and it's going to affect that, and it's going to be remembered and experienced in some way. So if you are the most simple experience, you can't actually contain these things which are going to modulate your valence, because you're kind of like a blank slate. It's kind of like saying, it must contain some level of boredom, or it must contain some color, it must contain a tinge of red, and refusing to believe that experiences could exist without having a tinge of red. That's really the confusion, is to imagine that experiences must have some level of suffering, or they must all have some level of pleasure, whereas they don't. But nonetheless, future experiences that come out of this, that appropriate whatever these simple computations are, that's what I'm asking. Are these that come out of that and remember this? Will they remember this fondly? That's my question. Will the algorithms that then exist on top of this and that are self-reflective remember this fondly? Will they have experienced this as being awesome and blissful? Or will they remember most of them as this being full of dread and pain? I don't know, but if you look at babies, they come into the world crying. So I wouldn't bet on it being awesome.